Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts Mark Johnston and Heather Choate.
Hello, everyone. Mark Johnston here, marriage expert and head coach with High Thrive Coaching. We are continuing our podcasts even without Heather. Heather, we're giving her a bit of a break as she has introduced a new member of her family to her family. So this week on podcast number 33, we are going to be talking about communication. The topic was set and I kind of had to laugh about it because, this is a topic that frequently comes up when people are talking about working on the relationship. They say, okay, we need to work on our communication, almost as if that's like a very specific or finite thing to be working on. They say, okay, well, everything will be good if we just work on our communication, or I'm going to therapy because I'm going to work on my communication. And when they go about doing that, they try to learn all these tips and tricks and techniques to do so. And certainly I'm going to say that there is a place for that. But I so much more prefer teaching principles rather than tips and techniques. So I imagine many of you probably are here and you might have some difficulty talking to your spouse. And while it really might be easy to point the blame their way and claim that communication problems are solely on their side, well, that kind of attitude doesn't actually get you to where you want to go. Before we get into like the meat of things though, before we really get further into this discussion on communication, I want to get into the client win of the week. So I wanted to share a win concerning patience, about giving without expectation. So if you're in a marriage crisis, then it can become, I can imagine exhausting to feel like you are continually putting forth effort without any perceived return. But I want to say that there is light on the other side of this. Of course, with our client wins, we always change names. In this case, though, I'm going to refer to Kaylin. Kaylin has been working on her relationship for some time now, and recently her husband did come back to her. And that was great. That it's not the win I wanted to share, though. I absolutely am thrilled whenever I hear this, whenever I hear that things are turning around. This win, though, is about Valentine's Day. And I know many of you that are in a marriage crisis right now probably wasn't the best Valentine's Day. Maybe for some of you it was. Maybe you are turning things around. It's great. But this win for Kaylin is about Valentine's Day because she actually ended up getting from her husband much more than she expected. A lot more. As she shared, what I picked out from her experience, Kaylin had been consistent with her changes. Her husband had, as he came back, because she had been consistent with her changes, actually was working hard to catch up with her and be the best version of himself. And, she didn't just receive a gift, she received flowers and all sorts of things, something that her husband hasn't done in a long time. My point on this is that Kaylin went for some time being consistent and putting out effort without seeing that return. And it did pay off in the end. And I hear this time and time again that the person who is pulling away is unsure of changes, unsure if things can be good again. And what turns it around over and over again is consistency. To continue going forward even if you might not be seeing immediate results. So, and I just want to say, I'm so excited to hear of the wins from Kaylin, to hear that her Valentine's Day went well. And I've seen several others in the group where it's the same case, where finally you have a great Valentine's Day together. So I bet others of you, though, who did not have that same kind of Valentine's Day, you're probably here for the advice. On to, like I said, we could go on and on about tips and tricks, this week about communication. And sometimes I do that. Sometimes I do put out a lot of tips or tricks or small things to do. But like I said, I think it's so much better to teach philosophy. So much better to teach principles rather than techniques, because honestly, there are so many small things that could improve a relationship. And all those tiny things would be just simply impossible for someone to digest if I just listed them off. I don't think it's really an effective way. But in repairing a relationship in crisis, I like to look at what destroys a relationship first and work backwards sometimes. It helps me kind of give it a different perspective. So we're going to talk about communication, what destroys it. So when I was looking for ideas about this, I do have some favorites. I do have some favorite places to go for ideas. Dr. John Gottman, of course, is a very well-respected individual within, the marriage counseling field. Very famous for his work, and I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with some of his principles. In this case, I'm looking at his 4 horsemen of divorce, which are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And I can see, I want to point this out because many of those, well, actually all of them, there are things about communication that if you're including these 4 horsemen, will absolutely destroy your communication. Like if there's a lot of criticism and within your communication, you're finding a lot of fault. You're putting out a lot of blame. You're having a lot of those you statements. You do this, you always do that. Why are you doing this to me? It can really shut the communication down. I frequently hear, for some reason, more recent weeks, I've been hearing this a lot more from men, though I do hear this from women as well. A sense of like when they are together, that the men complaining about the frequent complaints and all the things that they're doing wrong and how just uneasy they feel around their spouse, and that it shuts them down. I was talking to an individual this week who said, I just lost the motivation to talk with my spouse because I didn't want to be blamed for something else. Contempt is a lot about negative judgment. It's how you see or describe the other person, and as it becomes more negative. And in my opinion, if there is that contempt, if there's that negative view of the spouse, it shows up in communication, even if you're not saying things directly. It comes through in tone, body language, and some of the subtle choices of words. And I'm sure your spouse picks up on it. The third one, defensiveness. It's about a lack of listening, that as you hear complaints and concerns from your spouse, that all what they said goes out the window, becomes invalidated because they're not right. You're going to defend yourself. You're not going to hear it out. And that shuts communication down if your partner feels like they can't speak up. And then the fourth one, stonewalling, is about apathy, shutting down, closing off, not engaging. And certainly that shuts down communication. So, I'm going to admit, I haven't read every book by Gottman, so I'm not sure if he talks about this. But, I was looking at his 4 horsemen of divorce, and I was thinking, I'd much rather focus in on pillars that actually create healthy relationship. And then once again, this applies to communication. And I think, if you have these 4 pillars, if you really work hard on them, I can imagine your communication will probably go a lot smoother. My 4 pillars of a healthy relationship or a healthy communication are, instead of, say, criticism, we have compliments. Within your conversation, if you are much more ready to notice those things that are going well, that you appreciate about your partner, the things that you think that they're excelling in, oh, how much people crave that. The other night, I was expressing some frustration with our children. Our family, with our 5 kids, we've been kind of going through a bit of the flu. It's been cycling through everyone. So pretty much someone in the family has been off and on sick for like the last few weeks. And it's just, I'm sure some of you parents can relate, as you are sick yourself and then your kids get sick, and then it can become exhausting. I was expressing some of this, and my wife turns to me and says, what, I appreciate that even though things have been difficult, she said to me, that you're still taking a lot of time to be there for the kids as a father. And, she said something along the lines of, I really see that you do well with the kids. And you know what, it felt good. It really felt good to hear that compliment from my wife. And you know what, I was so much more interested in engaging with my wife at that moment. Not that I wasn't before, but I was just sucked into that conversation. And it's not that I'm a vain person. Oh, my wife would not describe me as a vain person. I wouldn't describe me as a vain person, but it simply feels good to have other people recognize what goes well, and can very much open up a conversation. Along the same lines is that, instead of contempt, a negative judgment of a spouse, that appreciation or cherishing of a partner, I think, is a very solid pillar of a healthy relationship. Assuming the best intentions. I imagine any couple is going to clash at some point. And the question is, what happens when the two of you clash? Many couples either retreat and avoid or go on the offensive, but in both cases, there's almost always some sort of negative assumption about the partner attached to it. And this can be changed the more that you appreciate or cherish your partner, even when they are hurting or lashing out. If you really cherish your partner, it shows through in your conversation. There's a bit more of a warmth to the conversation, to the interaction, that I'm sure, just like contempt, your spouse probably picks up on those moments when you're feeling like you really cherish them. Instead of defensiveness, I think the healthy pillar here is keeping an open mind, having a willingness to listen to what your partner is saying when complaints do come out, instead of immediately telling them why they are wrong. It can go a long way if your spouse feels validated, heard, understood, if they feel like you are interested in what they have to say. Or perhaps they simply have an opinion that's different from yours. And, if you go on the defensive and if you're closed off and you shut that down, it's terrible. And so the point here is, if you're wanting to establish a healthy pillar of communication, you have to be willing to see things from another point of view, whether that is your spouse's or someone else's. And the more that you can entertain those thoughts, the more that you can put yourself in someone else's shoes and see things from their perspective, the better your communication is going to be. Fourth, instead of stonewalling, where that's a much very much an apathetic sort of thing, or a shutting down sort of thing, or closing off sort of thing. I think the fourth pillar, healthy pillar in communication, it would be proactive action. So if stonewalling is about avoidance and shutting down, a healthy relationship has an ability to proactively identify and address problems together. I can't tell you how many, so many couples who come to me and say, I wish I would have brought this concern up sooner. I wish I would have let my partner know how big of a deal this was to me, how important this was to me. I wish I had communicated this more. We probably wouldn't be where we are at if I had. And a healthy relationship is a proactive relationship that doesn't let concerns, problems sit aside. And even beyond that, doesn't let compliments or appreciation be set aside. The healthy couple is the one that seeks out those moments to address concerns and to express appreciation. And I can't tell you how important that is, because I would say a good 70, 80% of the people that I see who are experiencing a crisis, somewhere along the line, they say, I wish I had expressed these things better, or their partner says that same thing. Now I'm going to add a fifth pillar here. John Gottman had the 4 horsemen of divorce. I'm going to have a fifth pillar, because on some level, if there's all the compliments and all the appreciation and all the openness, where you're considering someone else's point of view and you're being very proactive, one of my concerns is that a side of people where they become too giving and they don't have that self-respect for themselves. It can be one thing to really be positive around your spouse, to cherish them, to be able to listen, but it comes to a point, if it comes to the point where those positive traits are taken advantage of, then there's certainly a need for this last pillar, that self-respect, to say, you know what, I can be open and I can be proactive and I can be appreciative, but I'm also going to respect myself and make sure that I'm taking care of myself and that I'm not sacrificing so much that it hurts me. And that should reflect in your communication. The respect for yourself, the confidence in yourself goes a long way in creating healthy communication. So those are my principles that I like to live by, that I like to teach in terms of helping people to have better communication. I want to know what you all think here. I want to know if you think that if there's any principles, any other pillars that are really necessary to have a healthy relationship. I would love to see it in the comments below. Love to see some discussion. Before we close up though, I want to get into our marriage myth buster. And because I was focusing a bit on Dr. Gottman's principles, I'm going to continue right along that with our marriage myth buster. A very frequently brought up principle that is attributed to Dr. John Gottman is the 5-to-1 ratio. And I will say that absolutely it applies when having healthy communication. The 5-to-1 ratio, if you're not familiar with it, it's sometimes referred to as the magic ratio. It is this principle that says, okay, for a relationship to remain healthy, there needs to remain a ratio of 5-to-1 positive to negative interactions. Basically, the amount of positivity in a relationship needs to far, far outweigh the amount of complaints and contempt and criticism and all those things. And while the myth here is that while this ratio is frequently brought up, I see, I read articles on relationships and marriage pretty much every day. And I see this principle brought up quite frequently. While it's frequently brought up, I don't think it's as well understood as I would like it to be. This ratio is not simply about saying nice things, because I hear people say, well, I'm putting out this effort. I'm buying them this gift, I'm saying this compliment, I'm doing all these things, and I think I'm keeping up this 5-to-1 ratio. It's not just about the doing, it's also about how well it's received, how well those interactions are received, and how well they are interpreted. We can go into many other principles in explaining this. A very common one that I like to bring up in illustrating this is the idea of love languages. If you're not familiar with that, there's a book on love languages, the 5 love languages. I think it's a great way of explaining the different ways that people experience love and connection with each other. But let's say that I try really hard to put in some positivity into my marriage, and I try to communicate and compliment my wife frequently. I try to use in the love languages terms, it's words of affirmation would be one of the love languages. But let's say that my wife, Jen, that's not her love language. That's not something that she readily notices or appreciates all that much. It's just kind of something that happens. A very real example is for my wife and I really, my love languages, I really like the physical touch. I really like the time. I can't remember it's off the top of my head. I can't remember the exact term for the time, but I really need, to feel loved. I need to feel like a priority, like there's time there. My wife has different love languages. And, so when we were first together as a couple, we had a bit of a clash on this. And we came to a point where we were asking, does my partner love me? My wife's love language is very much acts of service. She was looking for me to do certain things for her. And I just, that was just a regular part of marriage. I'd go to work and I'd, help with dishes and do these things. I didn't see it as anything special. And so even though both of us were trying to put into the marriage, even though both of us were trying to point out some things that we really appreciated, it wasn't being received quite the same. And so we perceived that there was less love in the relationship at that point until, just like I'm suggesting, one of us was a bit proactive and we brought up the concern. And as we talked about it, we were surprised about how much effort each of us was trying to put into the relationship during a very busy part of our life, and how much we weren't noticing. The thing is, your spouse's perception could be different from your own, and it's why it's an essential skill in marriage to have an ability to simply notice your spouse's emotional state and to check in, to make sure that the messages that you are trying to put out there, as you are trying to have an open mind, as you are trying to be, try to communicate those love languages, as you're trying to cherish your partner, it's important to make sure that those messages are well received. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who are frustrated with all the effort that they put in, only for that effort to be dismissed or not noticed, because this skill is lacking here. So the myth, as I was putting it, is simply the myth of the 5-to-1 ratio, that you just need to do nice things more than not nice things and everything goes well. But the myth was, there's a caveat to that. And I wanted to clarify that for all of you. So I hope this all was helpful, and I hope this was useful, and I hope you came away from this with something to help you with communication with your husband or wife. Once again, like I said, I would love to hear your opinions. If you feel like there's other pillars, other healthy principles that really create a wonderful environment in a loving relationship like a marriage, please let me know below. If you guys are needing help with your own marriage and you're needing some support, let us know as well. We would love to talk to you. If you want to be proactive yourself and just get going with that help, you can always visit us at www.highthrivecoaching.com/apply to set up a free call with one of our team members to see if one of our programs is right for you. Anyways, thank you all for being here, and I will see you all next week.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.